for Mr. Nelson Mandela. But before I hand over to Justice Moseneke, I wish to take the opportunity to thank you all, members of the media, for your support during the difficult time in December, following the passing away of Nelson Mandela. Without your support, it would have been extremely difficult, otherwise, the outstanding coverage that was given. I would like now to hand over to Justice Moseneke and his team.
Professor Jabulo Ndebele, thank you ever so much. And once again, let me add and say thank you for coming out, ladies and gentlemen. Much appreciated. I am here together with my fellow executors, but more will follow in a moment. We have a prepared press release with annexes, which we're going to make available to you. So don't go scribbling too hard and fast, because we'll make this available, and the release will be online very instantly as we finish here. In view of the extensive public interest in the will of the former President Nelson Mandela, following his death on the 5th of December 2013, the executors have decided to prepare an executive summary relating to the will and the winding up of the estate. The purpose of this document is to provide an executive summary referred to in paragraph 1. The executors are in favor of a full transparency in handling the estate. They do, however, wish to achieve an optimum reconciliation between the objective of transparency with the objective of efficiency in winding up of the estate and obviating unnecessary and ongoing extensive inquiries relating to the contents of the will and the winding up of the estate. In this spirit and with this objective in mind, the executors have caused this executive summary to be prepared. In addition to dealing with the contents of the will, the executors propose to institute certain procedures to deal with inquiries related issues. Finally, by way of introduction, the executors wish to stress that first, this executive summary is precisely that. It's a summary and does not purport to be a full exposition of the will. Two, they are simply seeking to achieve, as I say, the objectives set out above, and they do not wish to frustrate any person's legal rights of access to the will. In fact, let me add, immediately after it will be available at the Master's office for public inspection. The executors and administrators will be responsible for the winding up of the estate in accordance with the applicable South African law. The executors and administrators will not be involved in issues of customary law, particularly insofar as concerns matters of status or traditional status within the family. The will of former President Mandela. Former President Mandela duly executed a will on the 12th of October 2004 and a codicil thereto on the 7th of September 2005. A second codicil was executed on the 9th of September 2008. The above-mentioned will and codicils have been lodged with the Master of the High Court. This has been done together with the lodgement of all the legally required documentation. The Master has accordingly registered the estate and duly appointed the executors nominated in the will. Letters of executorships have been duly issued by the Master. The persons appointed as executors and administrators in terms of the will are myself, Dikgang Moseneke, Judge President Themba Sangoni, and Advocate George Bezos, SC. Both my fellow executors are here present. And as I said earlier, all three of us have been duly appointed in those capacities by the Master. Former President Mandela expressed his earnest wish in his will that his executors and administrators should, in respect of any important decisions and on the needs of his family from time to time, consult, but no more than a wish, and without fettering the executors and administrators in the performance of their functions and the exercise of their powers, with Mrs. Gracia Machel, Miss Makaziwe Mandela Amua, and Miss Mandela Dlamini. I turn now to procedure for winding up of the estate. In order to assist the executors in the day-to-day performance of their statutory functions, the executors have appointed 2 firms of attorneys. Their attorneys ENS, as represented by Michael Katz, and attorneys Ledwaba Mazwai, as represented by Attorney Major Ledwaba. Naturally, the executors will retain full responsibility for the performance of their statutory duties and for taking decisions vested in them in terms of the will. In order to enhance the efficiency of the winding up of the estate, all inquiries relating to the will or the estate should be directed in the first instance to our attorneys, who are Michael Katz, and the details, contact details, are in the press release. So too Major Ledwaba, and the details are also in the press release. The 2 of them will, on a day-to-day basis, act as intermediaries between stakeholders, interested parties, and others, executors and administrators, and these will include contexts that may arise from the media. Devolution of the estate. The devolution of the Mandela estate is set out in Schedule 1, which we have attached to the press release. And the pages forming part of Schedule 1 are copies of the relevant pages in the will, so that the actual pages in the will originally, as were originally signed by Mr. Mandela. It is pointed out that paragraph 4.1 deals with bequests of the children and grandchildren with the former President Mandela's first wife, Evelyn Mandela. Paragraph 4.2 deals with bequests to the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren with former President Mandela's second wife, Winifred Nomzamo Madikizela Mandela. Paragraph 4.3, also attached here, deals with the bequest to former President Mandela's third wife, Mrs. Gracia Machel. In this regard, it is pointed out that the marriage between the former President Mandela and Mrs. Machel was in community of property. Accordingly, the bequest to Mrs. Machel of specified assets, as described in Annex A to the will, and which is also attached to the schedule that will be available to you, is subject to the suspensive condition that within 90 days after the date of Mr. Mandela's death, Mrs. Machel irrevocably and unconditionally agrees in writing to waive all and any rights which she may have in and to the Mandela estate. Simply put, entitlement will be limited to the listed items. Paragraph 4.4 deals with a bequest which Mr. Mandela has made to members of his staff. And I pause for a moment to mention them by name, as the details about the family you'll find in the annexes we're about to give to you. In this regard, Mr. Mandela states, in consideration for the personal service I've received from the below-mentioned persons, in addition to what I've already provided to them in respect of housing and other personal requirements, I hereby bequeath to Togo Mavuso 50,000 rand, to Michael Maponya 50,000 rand, to Zelda Lechransi 50,000 rand, to Sarah Mawela 50,000 rand, to Albertina Pedro Dima 50,000 rand, to Albert Ndlovu 50,000 rand, to Gloria Notanda 50,000 rand, to Xoliswa Ndoyia 50,000 rand, to Nocingile Khetle 50,000 rand. In paragraphs 4.5, Mr. Mandela deals with properties. In this regard, it is pointed out that paragraph 4.5.2 has been replaced by the first codicil, which is also attached. The papers will hand out to you, marked Schedule 3, as well as to a later codicil, a second codicil, which is also attached thereto. In paragraph 4.6 of the will, Mr. Mandela deals with bequests to schools and institutions. And I turn over to read the contents, specific contents of this part of the will. I bequeath to the following schools and institutions of learning which I have attended in my lifetime the following amounts which are to be used by the governing body or appropriate authority of the institution for scholarships and bursaries. Clarkberry Institution in the district of Ngobo in the Transkei, 100,000 rand. Hilltown Comprehensive High School in the district of Fort Beaufort, 100,000 rand. Fort Hare University, 100,000 rand. The University of the Witwatersrand, 100,000 rand. I am particularly concerned, Mr. Mandela continues, about the educational needs of the children of Qunu in respect of scholarships and bursaries. To this extent, I hereby bequeath the sum of 100,000 rand to Qunu Secondary School, which bequest must be used for scholarships and bursaries for Qunu Secondary School pupils. He goes on, in view of my having lived in Orlando West, Soweto, I hereby direct and bequeath the sum of 100,000 rand to Orlando West High School to be primarily used for scholarships and bursaries. The bequest is made in consideration of the role the pupils of Orlando West High School and its teachers played in the struggle for liberation of South Africa. And the will continues in relation to institutions. I bequeath to the NRM Family Trust 1,500,000 rand. I also bequeath to the NRM Family Trust the royalties. I direct that the trustees of the NRM Family Trust should at their sole discretion consider paying, subject to the availability of funds, a minimum of 10% and a maximum of 30% of the royalties to the African National Congress. The royalty payments must be used at the discretion of the African National Congress National Executive Committee for the purpose of recording and or disseminating information on the African National Congress principles and policies since 1912, particularly on the policies and principles of reconciliation amongst the people of South Africa. It is pointed out that the executors this relates to an explanation of some spelling errors in the names of the school. It's not of great moment, and we went ahead to determine to make sure that Clark Institution and Clarksbury High School were the same place, and Hilltown had been misspelled, and we just made sure that we located the right institution. That indeed brings to an end the disclosures we sought to make at this press conference, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, we will take questions, and I have an indication that we should have 15 minutes. So it's 15 minutes of questions. So if I can have them, you introduce yourself by name and where you come from and your question. Make them brief, and then we'll get your responses. Andrew?
Andrew Harding from the BBC. Could you give us some sense of the value of the full estate, and also whether that estate is going to be contested by anybody that you know of?
Pass it on. Let's take 3. David, you had a question?
David Smith of the Guardian newspaper in the UK. Could you right now, perhaps, just give us a little more detail about the bequest to individual family members and how that breaks down?
Okay, last one, Sophie.
On the issue of trust, is it possible perhaps to tell us who are the trustees and how will they function? Will they be there as long as they are there, or they have to be elected? And if that's have to happen, who is going to do that?
Okay. Madam Senator?
Yes. The law requires of us to file a provisional inventory. And the reason for this is fairly plain. Trust executors come cold to the work, and they often don't know what assets the deceased would have. So in the process of collating these, we have filed a provisional inventory, and it reflects a provisional balance, which is in the order of about 46 million. So that is provisional. This has not been evaluated. It is a commonsensical assessment which would have to be subjected to verification, including whether or not in fact the assets belong to the deceased. Of course, that would exclude royalties, which in their very nature are prospective. So they would have to accrue over time, and we'll have to find a formula in trying to determine them. Contest, I'm not aware of any contest of any type. The will has been duly lodged and has been accepted and registered as such. Details of bequest to family members indeed are set out in the handout we're just about to make. And this is a 40-page will. If I were to read it out, I will detain you quite considerably. So there's no attempt not to tell you, but you're going to see it in the details of the bequest in the original form in a moment. And the last question relates to trustees. We, of course, have to be careful at this stage. These are early days. We all have to go and study the will quite carefully. But it's a will which is fairly interactive between personal assets and assets which are held in trusts. And that whole exercise will have to be done quite carefully and completed. So there are 3 trusts which are mentioned in the will. The first is called the Mandela the Nelson Mandela Trust, in which sit Advocate Bezos and Advocate Wim Trengove as trustees. And there is the second trust called Mandela Trust, not to be confused with Nelson Mandela Trust. And in it sits trustees Advocate George Bezos, Mr. Tokyo Sekhwale, and Judge Sangoni, and Mr. Bali Chweni, as well as people who sit as directors in a company called Magnific. And then lastly, there's a Nelson Rolihlahla Family Trust, again not to be confused with any of the two proceedings, in which sits trustees Richard Lobcha and Bali Chweni. Those are the trusts, and as I say, a close reading of the will will still have to be done in order for us to have a full grasp of the interaction between assets in the trusts and assets which are personally held, which were personally held by the deceased former President, Mr. Mandela.
Okay, next round. There's a hand there. Lee.
I'm Khalang Bata from Bloomberg News. Mr. Moseneke, I just wanted to confirm, the 46 million, is it in rands or US dollars?
Okay, second question. Lee. Okay, that's the second one. Let's take the last one, and then the judge will respond to all three. Did you get the question?
So I didn't quite get the question. It was very faint.
No.
No.
Fiona Ford, and it's a question to Mr. Bali Chweni. Mr. Chweni, can you confirm if the 46 million referred to as the total of the assets is the personal assets only, or does it include the assets of the trusts and any other commercial entities?
Okay, so those are the three. Judge?
Well, thank you. Very quickly, we're talking about rands and not USD. You'll find it's a matter of some interest that some of the bequests are made in USD currency, which is not quite immediately clear to us, but just a matter of historical interest, I think. But we're talking about rands. The second thing, Charles, there is a condition that obviously flows from operation of law, people meriting community of properties. If the one passes on, the partner remaining would be entitled to half of the estate. And normally there would be an election, either what the will would make available to her, or what she may opt to have exactly half of the estate. So it's an election that has to be exercised in 90 days. So that is still pending. And within 90 days, Mrs. Michelle will let us know what her choice is. And the last question from, let me say, Ms. Ford, I'll hand you over to Mr. Chweni because you want to hear that from him, and he probably know more about that than me. We as executors are unable to confirm any more than that. These are estimates that have been made available to us. We are yet to get down to the business of finding the asset, listing them, valuing them, and accurately reflecting them. So to that extent, I just want to make it over and over again. We have a duty to file a provisional inventory, and that is what it is. and it could be 1/10 of what we've just said the value is, or maybe double. But having said that, we've done no more than to do what the law requires of us, rough and ready estimates, and that's what we have filed, as which you will see in the master's file. I wonder if Mr. Cheney wants to say anything about this.
He pretty much covers everything, just except to the direct question. Yes, it excludes the assets that are sitting in the trust.
Okay. Last round.
Thank you. Tula Sizwe from ENCA. Could the executive property as to what the will says with regards to that, access to that and use of immovable property in various areas, including here in Houghton and also in Qunu? Thank you.
Milton Nkos, BBC News. Can you please explain to us, Mr. Moseneke, what the mood was this morning when you were reading the will to the family? Thank you.
Deborah?
Hi, Deborah Patter from CBS. Just an additional question on that. If you could also say, are there any personal words in the will in terms of explaining why decisions were made to provide, for example, bequest to the family, to the staff members, to the schools, any sort of personal indication of what Mandela's thinking is? Obviously, the distribution gives us that. But were there any special words in the will?
Any last questions? Because there won't be any questions with the executors at the end. So if you have one burning question, that will be it. Any other final questions? That's the last round. Okay, there's a hand there.
You know,
okay. That was the last question, right? Okay, thank you. Madam Senegal.
Tula Sizwe, Simelani, the handout that we're about to give you sets out and deals with fixed property. As I've said earlier, I'm more than glad to read it out, but in fact it would consume all our time because you can read it, so we have it in there. And Mr. Mandela does make provision for the devolution of the Houghton home, the Qunu property, as well as a property in Umtata. And those you'll readily see as we rise here and you get the handout. So he does deal with all three of them. The BBC, Milton, you say you want to know what the mood was. Reading wills, unfailing wills to family is always an occasion that is charged with emotions because it brings back so much. But it went well, and the will was read from page to page, and that therefore took longer than we had estimated, and for that we apologize for keeping you here. And there were clarifications sought from time to time as we moved on. So that is the response. I think that is my response to that one. And virtually all of the Mandela family and descendants and so on were present, and we were well pleased by that. Yes, Deborah Petter, there are specific words that Mr. Mandela uses throughout. I think you'll find it quite an interesting read, because quite often he expresses why he makes virtually every bequest So I think that's part of the reason why it would run into so many pages, because he tries to have a rational ground for making the bequest. Rational or emotional ground, but nonetheless an explained one. Once more, thank you. The last one was about, I don't know where Mrs. Michelle is going to live. I don't know what is due to her from government. And I'm sure there are matters that can be ascertained in due course, or which she could reply to. Once more, thank you for your attention, and thank you for coming out.
As I said, if I can please plead with you not to leave the room, because the executors would like to leave first, and then the press release and the packs will be made available in the room. So please do not leave the room. Do not leave the room. I can see that as I say, do not, there's movement towards the door. So in other words, stay where you are. And then in terms of the beneficiaries who are sitting here, they are available to speak to you. So they are available for interviews with you. So if I can plead with you to then let the executors leave the room. And we thank you very much for having come through.
Clearly, it has been impacted by the rain and the taxi strike, and that's really just impacted people coming in, but people are still calling in and trading on the online platform. We have extensively stress tested the platform, and